I guess it all started at that parent-teacher meeting back in October. The weather had just started to cool, and I remember fussing over what to wear, not because I cared what the other parents thought, but because something inside me wanted to feel seen. You know that feeling? After years of marriage, routines blur, conversations get shorter, and sometimes you just want to remember what it feels like when someone notices you. David, my husband, was supposed to come with me, but he texted an hour before to say work ran late. He apologized, of course. He always did. But I was already dressed and halfway out the door. Our son Luke was struggling in math, and I didn't want to miss the chance to speak with his teacher face to face. When I walked into that classroom, I didn't expect anything unusual. But then Mr. Carter looked up from his papers. I recognized him immediately. Young, maybe mid-30s, with that messy kind of hair that looks like he doesn't try too hard, but still somehow pulls it off. He stood up, smiled, and reached out to shake my hand. "Mrs. Langston?" he asked. I nodded, and for a second, I felt like I'd forgotten how to speak. His voice was low and calm, and he had this presence about him that made the room feel smaller, quieter. I couldn't help but notice the way he looked me in the eye when he spoke, not like he was trying to impress, just present. I hadn't felt that in a while. We talked about Luke for a while. He mentioned how bright he was, how he just needed more confidence in class. I found myself smiling more than I should have. At one point, he made a joke about how all middle schoolers seemed to think algebra was a form of torture. I laughed, too loudly maybe, but it felt good, light. As I stood to leave, he handed me a sheet with some resources Luke could use at home. Our fingers brushed, barely, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It caught me off guard. I told myself I was imagining it, but I didn't stop thinking about that meeting. And over the next few weeks, I found myself checking the school portal more often, leaving comments on assignments that I knew Mr. Carter would see. He started responding, just simple things, but always warm, encouraging. There was a message about Luke's recent test score, then another about an after school program, and then one just saying thanks for being such an involved parent. It was harmless, I told myself. Then one afternoon, I bumped into him at the grocery store. Completely random. I was alone, grabbing stuff for dinner. He had a basket full of frozen meals and oranges. "Looks like we're both surviving on fumes," he joked, motioning toward my cart. We talked for a bit, just small stuff. He told me he lived nearby. I didn't tell him that I already knew. Luke had once mentioned it in passing. Before we parted ways, he said, "Hey, if Luke ever needs extra help, I offer tutoring sometimes. Just throwing it out there." I nodded, probably too eagerly. When I told David about the tutoring later that night, he shrugged. "If it helps Luke, why not?" he said. So we started the sessions once a week, Tuesdays, after school. At first, Luke would come home with worksheets and new tricks for solving problems. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be busy, but I could hear them laughing from the dining room. Mr. Carter's voice made our house feel different somehow, more alive. Then one week, Luke had a soccer game scheduled at the same time. He wanted to reschedule, but I said no. I didn't want him falling behind again. I told Mr. Carter he could still stop by to drop off the new lesson plan. When he arrived, Luke was already gone. I hadn't realized how nervous I felt until I opened the door. He looked surprised too, like he hadn't expected me to actually follow through. "I can just leave this with you," he said, holding out a folder. I took it. "Do you want to come in for a minute?" I asked. "You drove all this way." He hesitated, just briefly, then stepped inside. We sat at the kitchen table. I offered him tea. He declined. There was this silence between us, not awkward, but heavy, like something was sitting right there, waiting to be named. He glanced at my wedding ring. I caught it, and I didn't say anything. "I hope this isn't weird," he said quietly. "It's not," I replied too quickly. We didn't talk about math. We talked about books, favorite movies, the places we'd both always wanted to travel. He told me he used to play piano as a kid. I admitted I used to write poetry before life got in the way. At one point, I looked at the clock and realized 45 minutes had passed. The sun had gone down. I stood up, brushing imaginary crumbs from the counter. Well, I said, I should probably start dinner. He stood too. Yeah, of course. But neither of us moved toward the door. And for a second, just a second, I thought he was going to lean in. He didn't. He stepped back. His eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than they should have. Tell Luke I said hi, he said, his voice a little lower now. I nodded. I will. He left. I closed the door and stood there, heart pounding in my chest like I'd just run a mile. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew I had to be careful. And yet, I found myself hoping he'd stop by again. After he left that night, I stood by the window for a long time, watching his car pull away. I don't know what I was expecting to feel. Guilt, maybe? But I didn't. Not yet. I just felt something. Something I hadn't felt in years. David came home late again. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, his face buried in emails even as he sat down to eat. We talked about Luke's game, bills, groceries, the usual. I smiled, nodded, responded at all the right times. But inside, my mind was somewhere else. I met David in college. We were both studying business. He was the serious type, already wearing button-downs and talking about stocks while the rest of us were still figuring out who we were. He was stable, reliable. The kind of man you marry if you want a solid life. And I did. We got married right after graduation. Had Luke 2 years later. The first few years were happy, full of those little discoveries that make a new marriage feel fresh. He used to leave notes in my lunchbox. I used to surprise him with silly texts during meetings. We held hands under the table during dinner with his parents. It was sweet, warm, but then life happened. Jobs got demanding, Luke got older, the mortgage needed paying, and slowly, without realizing it, we stopped looking at each other the same way. Everything became functional, dividing chores, scheduling play dates, checking boxes. Even intimacy started to feel like something we penciled in if we had the energy. I didn't blame him. I didn't even blame myself. That's just how marriages go, right? But then Mr. Carter, Daniel, stepped into our lives. And suddenly, I wasn't just a mom or a wife. I was someone he looked at like I still had stories to tell, like he actually wanted to hear them. The next week, Luke had a dentist appointment during his usual tutoring time, so I messaged Daniel and offered to swing by the school instead to pick up the materials. I told myself it was practical, efficient, but I wore lipstick that day. Something soft and red, just enough to make me feel like I'd made an effort. When I arrived, school had just let out. Kids were trickling toward the buses, and the hallway smelled like sweat and paper and bubble gum. His classroom was quiet, the door open. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw that flicker again, surprise, interest, something in between. Didn't expect you to come in, he said, standing up. I smiled. I was in the area. We talked a little about Luke, but neither of us was really trying to steer the conversation back to school. He asked about my week, my work. I'm a part-time events coordinator. Nothing glamorous, but it keeps me busy. He told me about his latest classroom chaos, how one of the kids spilled orange soda on a projector mid-lesson. I laughed, genuinely. Then he looked at me a little more seriously and said, "You seem different today." Different how? He hesitated. Lighter, maybe. I don't know. It looks good on you. I didn't say anything for a second, just felt the way my chest tightened, the way his words hovered between us. Compliments hit differently when you haven't gotten one in months. Thanks, I finally said quietly. He offered to walk me out, and we ended up lingering by my car. He asked about my favorite books. Apparently, we both loved old poetry and crime thrillers. He said there was a coffee shop nearby that played live jazz on Friday nights, and I heard myself say, I haven't been out like that in forever. He raised an eyebrow. You should. I looked at him and I knew. If I said yes, if I even suggested it, he would have met me there. That much was clear. But I didn't. I opened my car door, sat down, and said, "Thanks again for the materials." He stepped back. "Anytime." That night, David and I had one of our routine arguments. Something small about the dishwasher, I think. But it wasn't about the dishwasher. It never is. It was about how distant we'd become, how neither of us really saw each other anymore. After he went to bed, I sat on the couch in the dark and scrolled through my phone. Daniel had sent a follow-up message. Let me know if Luke needs help catching up. I stared at it longer than I should have. The next Tuesday, Daniel came by again. Luke was there this time, and things were normal. But as the weeks passed, the tutoring became less about school and more about these little windows of connection. Daniel would stay a few minutes longer. He'd ask me about songs I liked. He'd compliment my hair or the way I styled the kitchen. One day I offered him coffee after the session. He sat across from me at the kitchen island while Luke played video games upstairs. The air felt charged. "I feel like I know you more than I should," he said suddenly. I met his eyes. "Why do you say that?" "Because I think about you when I shouldn't." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit me like thunder. I didn't know what to say. My heart was thudding so loud I was sure he could hear it. "I'm married," I said. My voice cracked a little. "I know," he replied. "That's why I haven't done anything. But it doesn't mean I haven't wanted to." We sat there in silence. My hands trembled slightly as I wrapped them around my coffee mug. Part of me wanted to scream, to run, to throw him out of the house. The other part? That part wanted to close the gap between us and let the rest of the world disappear. But then Luke shouted something from upstairs. The spell broke. Daniel stood up, clearing his throat. I should go. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Yeah. He walked to the door. I followed. Just before he stepped out, he turned to me. "I'm sorry if I've made things complicated." "You didn't," I said. "I did." After he left, I stood there again, staring at the door. Every week, he brought something into our home that I didn't know I'd been missing. Attention, conversation, possibility. And every week, I let it happen. But things were about to change. Something I didn't see coming, something that would drag everything into the light, was waiting just around the corner. And I wasn't ready for it. Everything unraveled on a Thursday afternoon. Funny how normal the day started. Sunny, quiet, with nothing unusual in the air. I had just finished folding laundry when Luke stomped into the living room, his face red, eyes wide, holding something out in his hand. "Why is Mr. Carter texting you this?" I blinked, frozen, my hands still clutching a towel mid-fold. On his phone was a message, not explicit, but too familiar. Daniel had written, "Hope your morning's going better than mine. Coffee still on me next time?" I didn't even hear myself breathe. Luke was only 15, but he wasn't a little kid. He knew what flirting looked like. And I knew instantly, no matter what I said, the line had already been crossed in his mind. "It's not what it looks like," I started. Luke stepped back. "So what is it?" I stammered. He's just, he's just been kind. Maybe too kind. But it's not. There's nothing going on." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. "Does Dad know?" "No." Luke looked down, then back up. "You said he was helping me. You brought him here. You smiled every time he came over." "I'm not stupid, Mom." And then he walked out. I sat there in silence for a long time, my chest burning. Shame doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, taking over your limbs. That day, I felt it crawl across every part of me. When David came home, Luke barely said a word to him. That was the first sign something was off. But it wasn't until Saturday morning that it exploded. We were in the kitchen. David was reading emails. I was pretending to scroll through recipes. Luke came down, silent, poured himself cereal, and sat down without even looking at either of us. David noticed. "Everything all right, bud?" Luke shrugged. David glanced at me. Did I miss something? I hesitated. It's just been a weird week. Then Luke said it, out loud, without warning. Mom's been texting Mr. Carter. She was gonna meet up with him. David froze. He looked at me like he hadn't heard it right. What? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Is that true? He asked, standing slowly. It wasn't like that, I said. I didn't cheat on you. But you were going to? He said, his voice rising, each word cutting like a blade. No, I said, barely breathing. I never saw him alone. I never touched him. We never. But you were thinking about it. He looked gutted, like something had just broken in him. You were letting him in. I wanted to fall through the floor. I wanted to scream, to explain. But what could I possibly say that wouldn't sound like a lie? Luke had left the kitchen. The silence between David and me felt like it had weight, like it could crack the walls. I can't believe this, he said, his voice quieter now. Was I really that absent? That boring? No, I whispered. You were just gone. For a long time. I didn't go looking for this. It just happened. But you didn't stop it either, he said. And he was right. That night, David slept in the guest room. Luke barely said 2 words to me. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the same message that had started it all, feeling like I had lost something I didn't even know I was risking. The next day, Daniel texted again. Did I do something wrong? Haven't heard from you. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I stared at the screen for a long time and finally deleted the thread. Every message, every bit of connection, gone. A week passed, then 2. We pretended to be okay for Luke, for the neighbors, for everyone, but something was fractured. One night, David came into the room while I was brushing my hair. He leaned against the doorway and said, I keep trying to figure out how we got here. I looked at him in the mirror. Me too. He walked in slowly. I'm not ready to give up, but I don't know how to trust you again. I don't expect you to, not right away. He sat beside me on the bed. Did you love him? I turned to him. No, I loved the attention, the version of me I got to be around him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, Do you want to fix this? Yes. He nodded once. Then we start over, from nothing. But you need to tell me everything. And I did. Every detail. The coffee, the compliments, the way I let things linger too long. It wasn't easy, but it was real. We started therapy. We took Luke out for dinner and told him we were working on things. Slowly, painfully, things began to shift. Not heal, not completely, but shift. As for Daniel, I haven't seen him since. He requested a transfer to another school. Maybe it was guilt, maybe just discomfort. Either way, he disappeared like smoke. But sometimes I still think about that feeling, the spark, the danger, the line I almost crossed. And I remind myself, sometimes the scariest things in life aren't the ones we do, but the ones we almost do, because they stay with us forever.